Okay, good. All right, so we're going to go ahead and come to order. Want to welcome everyone to the May 18th, 2017 special call meeting of the Maury County Board of Education. What we'll do first is, if I could ask the Vice Chairman to take our roll.
Ms. Parker? Ms. Kinzer? Ms. Martin?
Here.
Mr. Pennings?
Here.
Mr. Moore is present. Mr. Bates?
Here.
I'm sorry, I missed one. Mr. Atkinson?
Here.
All right. Mr. Beaver? Here. Ms. Powers? Ms. Morency? Mr. Dudley is not present. And that is 10 present, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So we've got 10 present. We do have a quorum so that the board can conduct business. What we'll do next, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then if everyone will remain standing, we'll have a moment of silence after the pledge. All right, and just so for the record, we do have Mr. Atkinson that's attending today's meeting electronically. Because of his military service, he's required to be out of the state, so he's currently in the great state of Arkansas right now. So we appreciate him joining us electronically. And our rules and the statutes do allow, whenever a member is absent because of military service or a family emergency, that members can attend electronically from time to time. So with that, moving on into our agenda, of course, we got the reminder of our mission, and maybe it's good to always take a look at that. That's what we're currently in the budget season of, maybe trying to accomplish some of those things on the mission statement. So moving on, we do have a proposed agenda that everyone received. Since this is a special call meeting, we're not able to make any revisions to the subject matters that we're going to cover tonight. But with that, is there a motion to approve the agenda? Okay, we got a motion by Mr. Pennings, second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. Ms. Shirley, do you have Mr. Atkinson's vote?
It says yes.
Okay. He's nodding yes. So if you could just report the vote whenever you're ready.
I'm going to go ahead and put Ms. Martin and Ms. Morency as yes.
All right, so that motion does pass on a vote of 10-0 or 10-1? Okay, all right. Just want to make sure for the minutes. All right, so we do have a agenda. Moving on into our agenda, we always have a section in our agenda where we want to hear public input. And so with that, we will hear from the public. If anybody of the public wants to come forward and to speak on to any item that we're conducting business on here tonight. So if someone could look maybe at a sign-up sheet. All right, so we did have one person that signed up to speak to the board tonight. That's Miss Lori Napier. Is she still present?
Can I speak here? No, I'm not. I don't look like her. She was dressed a lot prettier than I was tonight.
All right, so technically you didn't sign the sign-up sheet, but Mr. Huebner, we're always
Could I speak for her? It won't
yes,
take
we're
long.
always
All right.
good with you coming forward. So
Thank you. She had attended graduation, so she thought it would be
Understandable.
earlier. I guess we just need, because we've heard a lot of rumors about the teacher center, what's happening, and it wasn't any discussion in the budget meeting. And I had something I think she provided to Mr. Beavers and some information that she wanted me to share. But what is the status? Where are we with the teacher center?
All right, so with the Budget Committee meeting that just ramped up, the current recommendation to the board here tonight is to adopt a budget that would provide a 3% raise
Right.
for all
Yes, sir.
employees. I know that we had some proposed budget cuts of how we could possibly get there, and based upon the discussion of the Budget Committee and the action of the Budget Committee, the way that we made that work,
Right.
about the 500,000,
Right.
is that we made a reduction of some of the new positions that were previously
Right.
budgeted
Understood.
for. So it looks like currently we do have a balanced budget. So that's with the 3% raise, including, and then on top of that, we've budgeted about $1 million for step increases. And then, of course, also, I think we've got a very, probably a pretty good benefit package where I think the school takes on a lot of the healthcare costs. And with that, we're taking on about another, I think, almost $900,000 in healthcare increases. So that would be some of the things that I would think would probably be beneficial for employees. Now, there's some other things that we're looking at that's part of our KEYS budget, that some things that we would be taking out of fund balance, some additional resources that we would be looking at there. And then also part of our KEYS budget that we're looking at right now is also to add arts and music to make sure, I think that's something that the board or the committee decided, is to make sure that we have arts and music at all of the elementary schools. So that's another thing that we're looking at.
Okay. Where does the teacher center though fit in that? Is that?
Oh,
I mean-
that was one of the potential cuts, and looks like currently we've not had to do that.
Okay. Will they be staying here, or do we know that yet?
There's really no change.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that was just a,
Suggestion.
again, we asked the superintendent's office to brainstorm ways to try to make
I hear
our
you.
budget work, and it looks like we didn't have to get to those.
Okay,
items.
I've
So-
just got a paragraph here to read from her.
Okay.
It just says, attached document, I think she gave it to Mr. Beaver, details how much the Murray County Teacher Center saved the system with our top 14 orders alone. They filled an additional 473 orders for teachers and administrators, supervisors. Those additional savings are not reflected even on this sheet. We are financially a self-sufficient support program for the Murray County Public School System, except for our salaries, as we maintain a fluid balance within our restricted account, ensuring we do not have to reach out to the central office or the school board for additional funding. We utilize this account to restock our supplies and to maintain or replace our equipment. We also save MCPS teachers valuable preparation time. And she just had wanted me to get that in the record so that can be considered on a permanent basis, really much the value that so many of us use in the teacher center. So we appreciate
All right.
keeping here, and we'd love to keep it that way.
All right. Appreciate that
All right.
input and
And
feedback.
thank you for allowing me to speak.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tudor. Ms. Parker.
I was just curious if it was staying here, because I think I was here for a meeting on Thursday and was being shown that that section of H.O. Porter was going to be turned into College Hill Academy, was the discussion that was occurring at that time.
So we are talking about what can we do to make Northfield a more centrally located place, which means if we do need the room, then we may have to relocate the teacher center. We're looking at possibly a more centralized location than here that may also have some more opportunities for teachers to come in. There's multiple things that we're looking at, so we're trying to make the best decision to move forward.
So, but you are saying it is moving?
It may be moving. Nothing has been definitive yet. We're walking around and talking and trying to make decisions.
So question, if you said that you're trying to move Northfield to a more central location, so you're looking at putting it here,
Maybe, yes,
possibly.
possibly.
But then you're also saying that you need to look at the teacher center being in a more central location.
Well-
Why is
well-
here not a central location?
Well, if we need the rooms
Right.
for Northfield, we may have to relocate the teacher center, and we're looking at possible options, places that we could put that.
So in the budget, there's about 18,000 for lease payments, I assume, for Northfield. Does that mean that we don't need those lease payments because we're going to be relocating them here?
We don't know that yet because no decision has been made. But if we do decide to do that, that could be a cost savings, yes.
Well, I will tell you that when I was here on Thursday, they were measuring for carpet. So I hope that if we're
doing our
I mean,
due diligence.
if we are, picking out our drapes and all that kind of stuff, I would just assume that we've made a decision. So I hope if that decision's been made, it will be conveyed to the board in a timely manner and not just.
We can do
I
that.
don't want to include $18,000 in our current budget for Northfield if
Sure.
we know that we have no intention of having Northfield up there.
Sure.
And it sounds like that's something that we don't really intend on doing. So,
All right, so getting back to our agenda, we've completed public delegations, moving on to our budgets. So we've spent several weeks in committee going over several budgets, and our budget committee has made some recommendations that we have here today, and so those are we're going to be reviewing. First one that we have up, yes, Mr. Moore.
Never mind.
All right, so first thing that we do have is the food service budget. We do have a recommendation from our budget committee that we just had, and part of that budget committee recommendation was a revised recommendation. It would be based upon what we reviewed in the past, and it would include a 3% raise. So, all right, so we have a motion to approve and adopt the committee's recommendation. And since that did come out of committee, we do not need a second. Any discussion on that particular motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. So, Ms. Shirley, if you'll just report the vote whenever you're ready. All right, 10 votes, yay. All right, so that motion does pass on a vote of 10-0, so that recommendation has been adopted by the full board. Moving on to the next item of business, the Budget Committee had previously made a recommendation on a capital budget, and we may need to go back and make a revision to that. I'm not exactly sure. The previous, and of course, everyone's got the Budget Committee's recommendation as far as that capital budget, which totals $85,783,606. Is that correct, Mr. Breeden? That was what was recommended by the Budget Committee. And you have an itemization that is attached to our agenda, so everyone has an opportunity to review that. Now, the only question I have, Mr. Breeden, with the current recommendation is we thought originally we were going to eliminate the walk zone, but then on Tuesday, we made some reductions of the bus drivers so that we would just have a 0.5 mile walk zone. Do we need to also reflect that in this capital budget to make a revision to reduce some of those buses?
Yes, sir, that is correct. We would reduce the buses by 2 buses at a cost of $87,000 each. And so that would be, what would that be, $174,000 that we would need to deduct from that.
All right, so if the board decided to go with the current recommendation, we just need to adopt that recommendation subject to a reduction of $174,000 for 2 buses.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. All right, so we got a motion by Mr. Moore. All right, we got a second by Mr. Pennings, and that is to adopt the recommendation, the capital budget recommendation from the Budget Committee, less $174,000 that represents the 2 buses that we would be eliminating. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Does everybody understand the motion? All right. Any discussion on that motion? What's that? All right. All right, well, seeing none, we're ready to vote. All right, so Ms. Johnson, if you could report that vote, what was it? 8-2. So that motion does pass on a vote of 8-2. The capital budget has been adopted and approved. Moving on to our GP budget, you all will recall we were just in committee, and out of okay, sorry. So as part of that committee, there was a recommendation to approve a GP budget, which is okay. We'll get through it. So we had a recommendation from the Budget Committee to approve a GP budget with revenue in the amount of $98,254,797 and expenditures in the same amount as presented to us in the draft number 9 master spreadsheet, subject to the reduction of those line items for the for those salaries, or for those positions. All right, so we had that motion, and then previously on Tuesday, or we had that recommendation of the Budget Committee as part of our budget, and of course, our GP includes those key items in the, I think, the green column. Then we also have the key items in the pink column that were part of what we would utilize fund balance. And the total amount of that is, Mr. Parliament,
$4,813,893.
all right, so those are the recommendations from the Budget Committee. Is there a motion to approve and adopt those recommendations? All right, so we've got a motion by Mr. Pennings coming out of committee that does not require a second. Any discussion on that motion? Mr. Moore.
Okay. I'm just going to say some things I've said a million times already, but I'm going to say again. And these are points I've made throughout the budget process. I'm in favor of this as it sits. I think that's where we need to be. But I want to, a couple of things. I still think, and I know we're kind of wrapping up budget season this year, and I think we need to be very mindful that as we move towards the future and next year's budget and moving forward, we really need to start budgeting for maintenance items out of our budget. It's something we have historically not done as a body, but we are going to have to start doing that. I think that should have been something we all realized when we did the EMG report. We started looking at what the estimations were and what that means to us as a system, that we need to start. Those are annual costs that we at some point are going to have to start budgeting for. And that's a big number, and it's going to scare some people when we start looking at that, but it's the reality of accurate budgeting is we're going to have to start looking at those things, and we can't always rely on fund balance for that. I think the same thing too, and I said this the other night, and I think Ms. Parker said it as well. I think it's a mistake that we haven't properly budgeted for the diploma initiative in this year's budget as well. Again, I'm not comfortable continuing to go to fund balance for these items. And that's really my bigger point there. I think we have to be very careful. Some of the other changes we've made tonight as we start looking at adjusting what our revenue side looks like, that is going to start, especially as we start to do that, as we get into more accurate numbers, that is going to have an impact on our fund balance and is no longer going to look like it has traditionally the way budgeting has been done in this system. So that's something we, again, to go with what I said earlier, we are going to have to start changing what we do and moving those numbers into annual budgeted items and not just looking to fund balance as the catch-all for these things.
Ms. Parker.
One point of clarification, as far as the reduction for the 500,000, those positions that are not going to be hired will not be those related art positions and things that we were funding out of. No, that was additional. Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I think I would probably call those growth positions.
Okay.
So.
I just want to say this has been a long and painful process, and I still don't think that we're where we need to be. I am happy that we got a 3% raise included in here for employees. I think that is definitely needed, but I think there's still a lot more work that needs to be done on this budget. So I am going to be voting no on it, not because I don't support the raises, but because I don't support a lot of what I consider to be fluff that's in this budget. I'm really concerned, Mr. Moore mentioned the diploma initiative. We're funding a $100,000 central office position, but we're not going to make sure that our kids have the diploma computers in their hands first and foremost. And I think that's a huge mistake. I think we've been taking money out of textbooks for a long time. As I understand it, we're going to 7-period schedules in high school, and they're going to need more textbooks, and we're decreasing what we're spending on textbooks. That doesn't make any sense to me. When we sat at the teacher roundtable the other night, there was discussion about K through 2 materials that are needed, and I still have not seen anything from our instruction department to explain to me how kids that are in K through 2, including my own, are going to make sure that they have the resources to make sure that teachers, for that 3% raise that they're going to get, are not going to have to turn around and have to spend $15 a month on a reading series or math materials or other things. So I'm glad that we're trying to take care of the teachers, but I don't think we're going far enough, and that's the reason why I'm going to be voting against this budget. I understand that we're at a point where, quite frankly, we got to do something because the commission needs something. Unfortunately, during this whole process, we've had periods of time where we thought we were going to get better state numbers, and then come to find out we had the state numbers. Time where we thought that we were going to get better local numbers, come to find out we didn't have the right local numbers. So when your two biggest funding body numbers are not correct for a while, that's a big problem, and we've been doing this for over 2 months. And then with regards to a lot of the fund balance things, I still don't see a clear vision for where some of these things are going, and I don't like paying for things for just a one-time deal, because some of these things I think are probably, we envision being more permanent, like the RTI positions that have been touted. And then other things, I feel like it's just piecemeal. So I appreciate the work that the committee has done. I appreciate the work that central office has done, but I don't think anybody's done enough. And I fully expect this is going to come back to us, and I hope it does, because I think that's when the real work will begin.
Any other discussion on the motion? Mr. Beaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Ms. Parker. You know, I think we've got a lot of fluff. I think that we need to tighten our belt. And one of the things that I'd like to do is to separate the Keys budget from the GP and discuss some of it and vote on it separate if we could.
All right, so, Mr. Beaver, do you want, I guess, that was motion by Mr. Pennings, so we got a motion on the table. Mr. Pennings, is that okay with you, that we would bifurcate and we would vote on the GP and then vote on the key separate? Or do you want to wrap it up and vote it all at once? So separate out the key. Oh, all at once, okay. So, Mr. Beaver, I guess you could make a motion to amend, though. If you want to carve out and vote on the Keys budget items separately, you could do that.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to carve that out.
All right, so we got a motion by Mr. Beaver, which would be to amend the current budget that's on the recommendation on the table. And that motion would be to vote on, or that amendment would be that we would vote on the GP and then on the fund balance portion of the Keys separately, okay? So we got a motion by Mr. Beaver. Is there a second? We got a second by Ms. Parker. Okay, any discussion on that motion? Seeing that, we're ready to vote.
What's your vote?
No.
Ms. Johnson, if you could record Mr. Atkinson's vote is no. All right, so what's the vote? 5-5. Okay, so that motion does fail. We need a majority of at least 6 at the board level to take any action. All right, so we're back on the main motion. The main motion is to approve the recommendation of the GP budget as well as which would include the KEYS funding out of GP. Any discussion on that particular motion? Yes, Ms. Kinzer.
Say again what you're saying.
All right,
The motion is,
the motion is to approve and adopt the committee's recommendation of the GP budget, which includes the use of the fund balance towards the key items. That would be in the last column. What column is that, Mr. Parliament?
Column I.
so that the motion is to approve the GP budget and the Keys budget.
That's correct.
Okay, I was going to entertain a motion that simply said that we adopt any budget that includes a 3% raise.
All right, so that's part of the current motion.
Right,
Would be
okay.
for that to be,
All right.
to take place. All right, so if the motion passes, we will be approving our GP budget, including the raises, as well as the use, and that would be the key items. Some of those key items are already part of, in that GP, some of those key items are actually would be the usage of fund balance. That would be in the pink column. All right, so does everybody understand what they're voting on? So, Ms. Johnson, you could probably just say motion is to approve and adopt the committee's recommendation of GP and KEYS funding. All right, any other discussion on that motion? Seeing that, we're ready to vote. Mr. Pennings. It came out of committee, so it doesn't require a second. All right, so that motion does pass on a vote 8-2. We do now have a GP budget to be able to propose to the county commission. Now, as indicated to you all, the county commission and their budget committee, they've got kind of a quandary of how they review our budgets, because some of them have conflicts where they can review most of the budget, but if they are either an employee of the school or if they have a spouse who is an employee, that would prohibit them from voting on that particular budget. And so because of the makeup of the budget committee, that would be almost everybody on the budget committee except two, and they wouldn't really have a quorum at that point. Now, I will say that I've looked at the statute. This is a new statute that the General Assembly, I think, passed last year. I don't quite read it as broadly as they do. I think that it's really, I think the GP, just because if it contains a raise, I don't think that necessarily causes them to have a conflict. I think it would be if we just went over there with an amendment or specific appropriation to give raises, then they would have a conflict. But that's not their interpretation. Now, I will say that I think that the county's attorney probably has a similar interpretation than I do, but he went to the comptroller's office to try to get some guidance on that, since it is a new statute, and they led him to believe that that's not the case. That if salaries are included in the budget committee cannot, those members cannot take up that and even discuss it or even be part of that discussion. And but what their understanding is from the comptroller's office is then when it gets up to the full commission, and when the full commission then combines all their budgets together, at that point they don't have a conflict. So again, I'm not 100% certain of those interpretations, but I do want to cooperate as much as possible with our funding body. They've made a request that we would submit two different budgets. Kind of option A would be what we've just voted on, and they've asked to if we could prepare an option B that would not contain the raises, and this would be to allow the budget committee so that they could go ahead and look at our budget without the raises, and then once they then look at the Plan B with or Plan A, I guess, with the raises, then those budget committee members, that's when they would recuse themselves and somebody else would have to take over in order to have that discussion. So that's what they've requested. I do want to try to, I guess, accommodate them as much as possible. So, but I want to get input of the board members if they have some other input they want to do. If not, I would entertain a motion that we would pass a Plan B budget, just like we just did, but it would take out the raises that we just voted on, so that they can then have two different documents that they can discuss separately. All right, so we got a motion by Ms. Kinzer. Is there a second? A second by Mr. Moore. All right, let me open the floor for discussion. Mr. Pennings.
Well, again, I guess it's me, but for years, our funding body has wanted to be able to go line by line and do a line item, yes or no, on our budget. If you got budget, if you can find, I don't know how many people they have on their budget, but if you can find 5 or 6 people out of 22 that don't have a conflict of interest, something's definitely wrong. So I'm against submitting a Plan B budget. That lets them vote separately on teacher raises and that is not their job.
Mr. Moore.
I'd just like to say I interpret it the same way you do, Mr. Bates, and I've had some discussions with several county commissioners, but I think we're kind of stuck with that. So I don't like it. I like making sure we're very clear about what we pass, that is what we intend to send to them. However, for this process to keep moving, I think we're going to have to do this at this point. So.
And that's my thing. I think if I thought that this was like some bad faith where how we're going to trick you, take out the raises and then we're going to pass that one. I don't think that's the case. I think it's more, there's a desire to probably fund some raises. They just want to be able to, from a practical standpoint, to be able to have some discussion on that. And they're just running into some practical problems based upon the interpretation of this new law. So, Mr. Moore.
And just to clarify that for those who don't know, this is a poorly written state law that has put and there was discussion on this last year with the county commission as they tried to struggle with how to handle this. They are in a bind on this as well. They don't like it anymore, I think, than we do, to be honest, but they're having to go on their legal advice on what they're being told to proceed with. But again, this is just sometimes what we have to deal with a poorly written state law, as we've seen in other cases where we have to kind of wade through it and figure things out on our own.
All right. So, and I don't even know if I want to call it a Plan B. Because I don't really want it to be that it's a proposal, that we're making a proposal. I want it to be very clear. Our proposal is A. But we are going to make a duplicate version without the raises for discussion. So I don't know.
Is there any way to withhold an addendum?
What's that?
A way to just make that an addendum? I mean, to where it's firmly apart, but it's just a withheld addendum. Is there any way to kind of pull that out in a? Then it's not 2 different versions. It's just we are knowingly withholding a piece.
Well, that's kind of my intent, the duplicate, that it's version without raises.
Plan A and Plan B are two different things to me. Like that makes me nervous.
That's my nervousness too. I don't know if I necessarily want to call it a Plan A or Plan B, as though we were proposing a Plan B. What I think what I'm kind of narrowing this down is maybe a motion to submit a duplicate version without raises for discussion purposes only.
This is a mess, and you're just gonna have to come up with some kind of
Yeah.
like legal ease to protect it.
So I think that may make that clear, that we're not making a proposal of without the raises, but we are just making just for an instrument for discussion purposes so that they can see what it would be like without the raises. And then they can have their discussion at that point, and then when they get to the full, yes.
So essentially, we'd be presenting our approved budget simply without the raises included in that document.
Just for
No.
Just for
discussion
just
purposes.
It's a
No.
presentation to the
Right.
county commission.
Ms. Kinzer?
Then you give them the opportunity to line item veto and.
Well, that's what I'm trying to
No.
avoid. That's why I don't like the language of making it a Plan A and Plan B. I'm just trying to maybe find a way that we can narrow that down, that we're just making a document so that they can have that in front of them when they can have that discussion, where some of them can have it without the
I don't
raises
think-
in there.
I think you could pull out the cost of what the raises and instructional, that, separate with the raises, and everything else would be this. I think I would submit it without the raises.
Well, that's what they've requested. That's what the Budget Committee has requested, so that they can have discussion. They want us to be able to see one document that does not have the raises in it, so that all the committee members can have discussion. When they get to the document that is our proposed budget, then at that point, some of those committee members are going to conflict out, and they will have to recuse themselves. And there'll be another discussion of with those commission members.
Can they not recuse themselves for the vote just on the document we know?
That's what my,
So now.
yes, they can recuse themselves, but there will not be enough to have a
I know
quorum on the
Mr.
Budget
Evans is
Committee.
here, and he's on the Budget Committee, correct? So if we submit something that doesn't have the raises in it, you can discuss it, but I don't think that you,
If the raises in it, there'll be two people discussing out of six. The other four of us will either have to not show up and have somebody substitute for us. Like, I get the flu and don't show up, and I have to appoint somebody who does not have a conflict. If it comes with the raises in it, like I say, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. But anyway, and we're hoping to change it. The way they're interpreting it's called, if we work for the school system or have a spouse that works for a school system, and it's got the raise in it, we can't make the motion, we can't make a second, we can make no discussion. The other night with the proposal for the $150 bonus, there were two people allowed to talk out of six.
okay, but,
If it comes like he's talking about with no raise, just as a, I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know what the terminology would be, but just for a point of discussion without the raises, then all six of us will be able to discuss it, and then when we come time to vote, you just amend 3% of that total. That would be the way I would predict. I'm not Mr. Summers, but that's the way I would predict it would go.
which means that those two people would have that document and say,
Right.
we don't want them to have a 3% raise, that's too much money.
Well, I don't think that's gonna be the problem. And like I say, agree or disagree, the only other option is the four of us that have a conflict don't show up. They replace us. That's our only.
All you teachers out there and everybody else, when these things come to the commission, I hope you'll be there with us, right?
But with the raises, there'll be two people discussing the whole, and it's the crazy, you wanna call your lawmakers, state lawmakers, have them change something, that needs changing.
And I've, the biggest concern I have with that law is the lack of representation that potentially on some important matters that are affecting the county, there are large swaths of our county that have no representation.
At all.
Because none. And that's should be a concern for our legislatures, that they are, from a voting standpoint and representation standpoint, are potentially leaving out a lot of people with no representation whatsoever. So, Ms. Martin.
I am definitely I understand what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, and the rules are the rules. I mean, you don't have the opportunity to change that, and you did tell us if we would like to get that changed, we have those people that we need to be speaking with. But honestly, the 3% raise is the only thing in the budget that I'd like. So I definitely don't want it to be taken out, because it's the only thing in the budget that I think is good.
And just from a procedural standpoint, is it not possible for the commission to exclude it on their own, to say we're going to pull out the 3% raise as opposed, because although I did not vote for the previous budget, I like Ms. Martin, that's the one thing that I don't want to give somebody an out where they're looking at it as a plan A and a plan B.
They really can't, they have no authority over any type of line item or anything. They can't remove anything. They can't say, I like this, I want to vote on this. It's either an up or down vote on the entire budget. Now, what I thought would be a good way procedurally would be we would pass the budget, and then along with that, a budget amendment with the raises. And that way, that's, to me, very clear for them to be able to vote on the budget, and then on the budget amendment, that would increase the raises. And so I ran that across to Mr. Murphy, and he felt that the best way to proceed is what we're talking about here tonight. So, Mr. Penix.
Meaning no disrespect to anybody that's here or not here. You know there's going to 3% raise in there, but just because it's on paper, we can't talk about it. You know it's in there. Everybody's going to know it's in there because it'll be in the press. The board votes for a 3% raise. Now, the law may be ludicrous, and I can't do anything about the law. I say change your budget committee members, do what you have to do. But I'm adamantly against taking teacher raises or any employee's raises out of the GP and giving you a separate chance to vote on them. Because it's in the paper, I'm just against it.
Mr. Moore.
I'm all for trying to work with the county commission on this. However, I'm not in favor of materially changing what we're sending over. So as long as, if we can figure out a way to do it, and I really hate trying to do this at the last minute, sitting up here, because we always make awesome decisions when we're doing things in the last minute. As long as we're not materially changing what we're sending over, I'm fine if it can be figured out. But it doesn't sound like any of these solutions. I'm with you. I don't agree with an option A or an option B. So I'm not sure how to proceed personally.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, I don't like this either. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily follow it, but I just want to, that is a request that we received, and so I want to try to be as cooperative as possible. Like I said, I do not, that's not my sense that there's bad faith of trying to get us to take a raise out so that we don't do a raise. But it's not ideal, but this is, I think, one way to proceed on this. So the motion is not to change our budget. It's just we're going to be submitting a duplicate document that's not going to have the raises in it, and that's just going to be for their discussion purposes only. So they'll have that document. They'll all know that our real budget is going to be with the 3% raise. So I want to make, and that's what I've tried to clean up the language of the motion to make that very clear. So, Ms. Martin.
So if we say no to that,
What will that do?
what's going to happen? I don't like this, because the 3% raise is the only thing in there that I like. I don't like nothing else. It's the only thing in there I like. So if we say no to it, then explain to me what happens.
Well, then, according to their interpretation, any one of their commission members that is an employee or has a spouse.
Yes, you're saying they're going to leave.
Will not be
But
allowed to.
I mean, not leave, but they can't. Yeah,
Right.
I get
Will
it.
not be allowed to discuss anything with our budgets. And I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the interpretation that you all have taken is y'all can't even discuss the capital.
We can't discuss any part of it, any way, shape, form, or fashion, from the, like, motion is to adopt
Well, did they not do this
the
before?
full proposal. It'll have to be made by one of the two as well, and it'll have to be seconded by the person that takes over.
But how do you all do that with just two people?
We did it the other night, and they both voted for the raise, so that was a good thing. The rest of us just had to sit there. We could, according to Mr. Murphy's interpretation, that's what we have to go by. We can't comment any way, way shape.
But y'all can vote with just two people? Is that a quorum for
The
y'all?
way it works, and this, with each person you take off, it drops the committee size. So the committee goes from 6 to 2. It's a committee of 2. If we have 3 people there that night, it'll be a committee of 3. If you have 3 with conflict, you end up with 5 people with conflict, you've got a committee of 1. But the way he's interpreted the rule is it's different. It doesn't change, like, you've got somebody, it's not like being absent. It's like they don't exist at all. So what he calls it is a committee of 2. They voted on that one item. After that one item was handled, we went back to a committee of 6.
So there you go. So practically speaking, it may be one person over there voting on our budget.
Those 2 people.
Yeah, and and maybe that's the way to proceed. I guess I get a little nervous where things get narrowed down to just 1 or 2 people are going to have all the discussion. There's no other viewpoints, no other thing like that. So that would
So
just
if
be
we
the
vote
practical.
no, what would that do?
Everything stays as is. It'll go over, and then they'll just have to,
They'll
I
have
guess,
to
conflict
figure it
out. Yeah.
I have a
what
comment
I
and a solution.
Yes, Mr. Pennings.
My comment is, I'd like to know if Mr. Murphy checked with the State Attorney General of the state of Tennessee to get an opinion, or it's just Mr. Murphy's opinion. And I have a solution for you. Don't discuss it. We asked for 98 million something, just pass it.
Ms. Parker.
As far as other viewpoints not being allowed, if anyone has ever sat through one of their budget meetings, you know that they take everybody's point of view. So there are usually other commissioners that are there that do not serve on the budget committee that have a chance to have their say. So the idea that it's just going to be 2 people sitting there making a determination on this, ultimately, yes, I think that is the way that the voting would go down. But I think other viewpoints would be expressed if we were to just send over what we've already done. And personally, I feel like this is kind of like we've been working for the last several nights to try to get to 3%, and to send it over there without that just is offensive to me.
Okay. Well, y'all don't kill the messenger. I'm just passing along. So any other discussion on the motion? Yes, Ms. Powers.
We were at, 4 of us went to a TSBA meeting the other day, and I had asked Shirley to print this off, so it was sitting right here, and I was just looking over it, and it was talking about ways to develop the relationship between school board and county commission, and one of them is have attorneys discuss legal responsibilities in joint meeting. I would say let their attorney and our attorney just work with it and make some more calls, but this doesn't seem, I don't like the proposals of an A or a B or withholding anything. I really think there's some work that needs to be done at a level past our control before, it's most unfortunate that we're ready to go and we can't, but I feel like Jake and their attorney need to discuss it and make calls and find a solution, because none of these are good.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Powers.
I'd like to withdraw the motion.
Well, so we got a motion by Ms. Kinzer. It did get a seconded by Mr. Moore. I think you can withdraw your motion if you get the acceptance by Mr. Moore, but.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, so, and I hope commissioners see this is not like, we understand the predicament you are, Leanne. I guess, we want to try to accommodate as much as possible, but I guess there's just concerns about the practical parts of this. And certainly, I will reach out to Mr. Walliver and ask him to get in contact with Mr. Murphy. And maybe they can put their heads together to kind of navigate that, maybe get some little bit more clarity on that. And I think we did also get some information from TSBA. So our the Tennessee School Board Association, and they have the same interpretation that we have, that maybe it's being a little bit overinterpreted. So maybe there's some way, maybe that could help the budget committee to get some additional clarity. Maybe it's not as bad as maybe what everybody's reading that statute. So, okay. Yes.
May I please just, for the record, say, in saying what I said, it's really in favor of a very positive school board county commission relationship that I think y'all are we're all in a tight spot with factors beyond our control, and by slowing it down and letting legal teams take it for a bit, is in favor of a very positive relationship.
All right, so I think that we're getting towards the end of the business.
Motion to approve item 10, field trips.
Okay, so we do have a item on the agenda. This is something that needed to be added. Our current, looks like the new policy we adopted from TSBA provides that any overnight or out-of-state trips have to be approved by the board. Generally, we would put that on the consent agenda, but this is something that needed to be handled before. So we got a motion by Mr. Moore to approve that. Got a second by Mr. Pennings. Any discussion on that? Saying now we're ready to vote. All right, so that motion does pass on a vote of 10-0. So I'm just going to briefly, before we get a motion to adjourn in, let me just briefly say, I just want to let everyone know I appreciate you all hanging in. I know that the budget committee process has been a long road to hoe, so to speak, and I know everybody's tired, but we have got through the process. It's not a perfect budget. Now, I don't think any budget that's ever been passed is a perfect budget, but I do think we've come a long ways in this county. I think we came a long ways last year, and this budget does, I think, continue on the momentum that we've started. If we go back, if we look at what we're budgeting for, we're budgeting almost $1 million in step raises for teachers, almost $1.9 million in salary increases to give a 3% raise. We're providing almost $800,000 for more health insurance, or to cover more health insurance. We're providing new positions. If we look back at the Keys budget, and I know that maybe there's some concerns about using the fund balance, but look at one of the big components of that is the RTI, where we're seeing a huge impact in our schools right now. I think we're seeing the data, and we're doubling down on that. Now, yes, I think we are going to have to do some transitioning to start putting these things over into GP, but I think we're making a huge impact for our students. We're already seeing the impact, and so let's don't lose sight of our mission and our vision. I think we are accomplishing those things. It's not perfect, but I think we're moving in the right direction. So I'm hopeful as we move over into the county commission. Real quick, next Tuesday, 4:30, I need all my board members there. So that's when we begin the process. We've put together a budget of trying to move where we feel like these are the things that are going to be moving us forward as a board and as a county, as a school system. Now we've got to sell it. We've got to go to the county commission. We've got to talk to our county commissioners because they have a tough job. They really feel the impact of these things. So we've got to talk to our county commissioners. I would appreciate everyone to reach out to your county commissioners, and I would appreciate if everyone could be at our county commission meeting next Tuesday at 4:30. So with that, I'll open the floor for a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Moore. Second by Mr. Penny. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.